threats of a nationwide strike in Nigeria in the latter part of the week. What's the likelihood of the strike taking place? Are there any mechanisms that can be employed to stop the industrial action?
Well, it seems highly probable that the strikes may go ahead. The labor unions appear determined to flex their muscles, and essentially they claim not to be interested in the conversation that the government is restarting. As far as they're concerned, there's an agreement and they just want it sent to Parliament and enacted into law. The government and the state governors do not want to do that, so the stage seems to be set for a confrontation.
Okay, how reasonable is their demand of a minimum wage of 18,000 naira?
Frankly, I don't think, personally, I don't think 18,000 minimum wage is an unreasonable request. I do not think that any worker can reasonably live on less than that. And indeed, as the president said over the weekend, the lowest federal worker currently already earns around 17,000, as far according to the president. So the argument is not over much. I don't think there are many regular workers in the country who earn far less than that. I think the argument is more from the point of view of the states, who have a different financial profile from the federal government and who might be worried that enacting a minimum wage law which raises their wage bill might affect their finances very much. So I don't think it's a big concern, too big of a concern from the federal side. I think from the private sector, it's just the concern that, okay, this might lead to another general increase in wages and agitation for wage review and all of that.
But effectively, though, the government hasn't said they're not implementing a minimum wage. They've just introduced some sort of a moratorium to look at the mechanisms for implementing one. And effectively, the vice president, together with some of these governors, are just looking at ways of making it a feasible program, because for them, it's going to become a technical challenge in terms of implementation. Once some of those technicalities have been sorted out, is it a foregone conclusion that there'd be implementation?
I think the real problem is this. We have a federal structure, but the labor unions don't like negotiating on a state-by-state basis. They prefer to go to the federal government, negotiate an agreement, and once they believe they have an agreement with the federal government, they then want that to be implemented across the states. Now, I can understand from the state's point of view, their finances are completely different, the economies are completely different, and so that presents a problem. I think that is where the heart of the problem lies, in terms of harmonizing the different salary structures, civil service structures in 36 states, in the context of one single agreement that has been reached with the federal government. So that's why the states will want to resolve all these technical, they call it, examinations of the issue. But it's a problem. It's the same problem with the lecturers, it's the same problem with the doctors, it's the same problem everywhere. That penchant for the federal government and labor to reach an agreement, and then the labor seeks to make it applicable to all the states.
Opeyemi, just paint for us a picture as to how vulnerable the lowest paid workers are. You did say that many of them do earn already in the region of about 17 or so thousand naira, but we also know that pension reforms in Nigeria, for instance, are very new. They're not cross-cutting and across the board. So safety nets in terms of the lowest paid workers in Nigeria don't seem to exist within the system. Is it unreasonable for labor to be requesting a minimum wage in an environment where social services and social security don't work very well?
It's a mystery, frankly, how, like I said, how anyone in Nigeria could live on less than 18,000. The current minimum wage, the legal minimum wage, currently 7,500 naira. It's impossible for someone to live on that. Transportation alone in Lagos would tend to cost the average worker maybe 400 naira or 300 naira a day. If you multiply that by 20, Already the guy has spent half or a third of his income. Feeding, food prices are expensive. Accommodation is a problem in Lagos, which is why a lot of people live outside the city, the suburbs, in shanties and all of that. So, like I said, my personal opinion is that 18,000 naira for a regular worker, it's probably the minimum that you can discuss. I think it's about having a process of negotiating these things, and being assured that the states and the local governments work out the implications for their payrolls. They're sure they have the financing to take care of it. Right. The reality is that the informal economy ensures that people live on far more than that. So people get gifts, they sell something, this worker sells something, in addition has a shop, sells some GSM cards, sells some things. Otherwise, there will be a crisis. No one could live on.
Okay, using the terminology crisis, what would industrial action mean for the Nigerian economy? What sort of costs to the economy would we be looking at?
I think it would be, I hope that we can prevent the industrial action. We've had too many disruptions to our economy. We've had a recent strike from the university lecturers. We have the eastern part of the country in which the universities have been shut down for months. We've had an electricity workers strike some months back. I think it would be in the interest of the country if the strike can be avoided. Productivity is low enough without adding another strike. So for me, it's something, and then it complicates the political environment. Don't forget that those who feel that this may also have things to do with politics, the politicians will be interested in anything that can discredit the government. And so the government would probably have an incentive to ensure that this strike doesn't take off.
All right.
And so would business.
I mean, you talk about the fact that there have been many disruptions. So the question is, why can't the authorities resolve the crises? For instance, it's reported that within the education sector, there are periodic disruptions, a constant impasse, as it were, between the authorities and the federal government and lecturers and teachers, and they can never seem to agree on various grievances. Why is it that the unions can't help mitigate some of the grievances that come to the fore? The whole labor environment in Nigeria, unfortunately, in the last few years, has become very chaotic. And like I said, it's not just university lecturers. In Lagos State, doctors have been on strike for weeks, if not months. In the eastern part of the country, the universities have been shut down for months with the lecturers on strike. At the federal level, we've had a warning strike. We've had electricity workers go on strike. It's become almost chaotic, like I said. And I think that it's an indictment of on the government side as well, of those who manage labor. There's a minister for labor at the federal level. There are ministers, commissioners for establishments and all of that at the states levels. So it's been a general lack of responsibility, I think, and labor to some extent has a point. It's almost as if they have these agreements, but nobody pays attention to them until labor says it wants to go on strike. So that creates the incentive for labor to always say, let's have a strike. I think we need a more efficient system on the government side for dealing with labor, ensuring that issues that are discussed are executed, ensuring that there is progress. I think when labor perceives progress, perhaps there would not be this resort to strikes all the time. All right, I'm going to bring Kwebu Lekranji into the conversation. I mean, South Africans are notorious for having a vocal, militant labor movement, but others would argue that it is essentially because of the vociferous action of labor that democracy is what it is in South Africa, that the constitution is as strong as it is, and that the government is constantly held accountable on a variety of economic policies.
Yeah, and by virtue of that, they provide a valuable voice in the democratic process. And you can continuously see how they at loggerheads with other politicians that either agree or they disagree, and with that comes debate, and with the more debate you have, the more democracy you have. And one would want to at least see that process start playing itself out across Africa. You see, how else are you going to start getting labor movements going, and how else are you going to organize workforces? Otherwise, you literally just have a government which becomes uncommitted to its cause and can't quite clearly understand what it is they need to achieve, because they have massive priorities. I think unions firstly clarify for government what those priorities should be. They say, if you want to achieve, what is it that you need to achieve, and how do you need to achieve this? The caveat obviously to this is that unions' number one objective obviously is their members, and trying to achieve wages for their for their members.
All right, now the Nigerian authorities are having to deal with an issue of how to implement a minimum wage, and when we speak comparatively again, the two leading economies, this has been a talking point in South Africa, I think, since the dawn of democracy, is whether or not it's feasible and prudent to pursue a minimum wage. Can the fiscus handle a bloated wage bill? Does it create a culture of dependency instead of encouraging people to go out there and be entrepreneurs?
You see, on the one hand, one can argue that a minimum wage is actually hold back an emerging market, because how do you decrease your big unemployment numbers by having a minimum wage? But in the other end, how do you not exploit people? You know, what is right and what is wrong? China has been, and so has India, have been examples of where there has been exploitation. South Africa certainly has come a long road in trying to not exploit workers, and at least try and create a benchmark. I think it's a little bit of both, especially when you can put top priority, you can prioritize objectives in an economy, but with that you have a minimum wage. I think you've got a better working model where you can potentially appease both ends of the spectrum. Whereas if you don't have this minimum wage, how else are you going to do that?
Okay, Opeyemi, you mentioned that, you know, the Nigerian economy needs to be more productive, and I think there's just a consensus on that particular issue. Growth is forecast at 7.7% for this year. It's believed to be that kind of figure. But, I mean, growth has come with the government having incurred a huge deficit because of unbridled public spending, especially on infrastructure. So there is a question as to whether or not a minimum wage is the way to go, and whether or not the federal government can afford it.
Yes, that's and let me add that the structure of our spending, our budgets are spent largely on the current expenditure, on consumption, on salaries, on wages, on overhead costs of ministries. So yes, even though 1,000 naira per minimum worker may not look like much, the overall effect on the federal and state and local government finances in terms of further tilting the current spending that we engage in may be significant at the end of the day. And then you have the issue of productivity. Like I said, frankly, public sector workers in Nigeria are not your most productive workers, especially at the junior levels, unfortunately, which are the people demanding the minimum wage. So you have these ineffective public service consuming more of the nation's resources, and less naira going into the capital investment required to make the economy more productive.